Okay. So thanks for your patience there. So welcome back to Mission in the Gospels. And I'm sorry, I'll have my slides up in just a minute. We did a little bit of a prequel first with Mission in the Gospels. And this is all about maybe kind of reading the Gospels through a new lens, through the lens of mission. Now, these authors, and R. Jeffrey Harris, who wrote a whole book called Mission from the Gospels, argues that the Gospels can only accurately be read through the lens of mission, because that was the concern, the context for each of the unique Gospel writers in one way or another. So there's going to be a good bit of participation, good bit of discussion questions. Hope you have your thinking caps on, and also you will probably need whatever kind of Bible you normally use, if we get that far anyway, your phone, your paperback, whatever. But just to review real quick, when we say mission, what in the world are we talking about? Well, I took a stab at defining it as announcing, bringing, planting, and practicing the love of God. And we will see as we go on how well that definition holds up, but that's how I think of it. And one of the things we focused on during the prequels and the intros is that the gospel is and the good news is more multifaceted than some Christian circles might think about. And we took a look at Jesus's encounters with people and how the encounters were always different. The conversations were different, the circumstances were different, and what Jesus said and what Jesus did and how all these different people receive the good news changes, or can be different, even though the message of God's love and forgiveness is all the same. But what does becoming a Christ follower and being redeemed and all that, what does that look for an individual person? And it can be very multifaceted. We shared some of our stories, thought about our life story and how multifaceted it is. All right. So let's dive into Matthew. Now, before I do more of like the Mission from Matthew stuff that's in the curriculum, I want to do one thing that I like to do as an intro to the Gospel of Matthew. All of the Gospels are very unique. We don't always appreciate that because when we think of quotes and stories from Jesus, they come to mind and we're not necessarily thinking of one gospel or the other. But when you put them side by side or read them kind of one at a time, you start to see how unique they are. And so I just want to start with this to get our minds thinking about Matthew. So, and these will be on the screen to read, but the following verses, phrases, / stories appear only in Matthew's gospel, not in any of the other three. We're going to read them, and I want to hear from you what they might tell us about the writer of this gospel and what the particular concern of this gospel is. Okay, as we think about the fact that these passages and many others only appear in the Gospel of Matthew. So I've got 4 passages here. If anyone is willing, just unmute and jump in there and read this first one for us. These are all from the NIV.
Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven.
Okay, thank you. The next one from the same chapter.
Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock.
All right, from Matthew 21, someone else.
There was a man who had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, Son, go and work today in the vineyard. I will not, he answered. But later he changed his mind and went. Then the father went to the other son and said the same thing. He answered, I will, sir. But he did not go. Which of the 2 did what his father wanted?
Okay, and those of you who have more than one child may have had plenty of moments like this, where it's just that exact contrast. The last one from Matthew 25.
I was
I was-
hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was, the other is.
Is it blocked for you in the view?
Right,
I was, thank you. I was in prison and you came to visit me is the last part.
okay,
Sorry about that, Nadine.
that's okay.
So just in again, trying to think about you can tell what's most important to a gospel author, especially if you look at material from Jesus that they included that the others did not, and the common theme it might share. So taking a look at this and hearing it read, what's a big theme here in Matthew's gospel? There are many others like these, but I just tried to include a small sampling.
Actions speak louder than words.
Okay. Actions speak louder than words. Anybody else?
captured it.
Anything? Sorry.
Said Tom captured it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to put it into practice.
Yeah, so we really see a concern, especially in now this is not, you see this kind of thing in other gospels too, but Matthew especially, choosing the stuff that shows that faith has to have feet, as I like to say it, that it's about lived life and faith expressed and all of that, which is not in contradiction at all to, when we look at the book of Ephesians, Paul, he says that we are saved by grace through faith and not by works, and you hear about, no, you can't be preaching a works righteousness gospel. This is not about works righteousness. This is about what faith is and what faith does, and what it means to say yes to God. I've always thought it very interesting, this parable of the two sons. It's a fascinating parable because you got the one son that says, I'm not going to do it, but he does. And the other son that says, I will do it, but he doesn't. Jesus' clear implication that the obedient son, the faithful son, is the one who, even though he says no verbally, actually does what is asked. So raises interesting questions about what faith looks like and what it means to actually believe in what God wants. So that's just a little bit of an intro to one of Matthew's concerns. From the curriculum, welcome to a new part of the study. With this unit, we begin our investigation of the gospel writings. The faith community Matthew is addressing is being forced to face the challenge of faith in a new age. It is a post-resurrection faith community, no longer grounded in the physical temple in Jerusalem. It is a faith community that was forced to flee Jerusalem during the warring days of the destruction of the temple. In their exile, this Jewish community finds itself ministering side by side with the very people they had been taught to distrust and hate. The exile created major change, and they find their faith community filled with the very people who not long ago would have been seen as unclean and as sinners. And this radical change caused all kinds of questions to arise. Because remember, the destruction of the temple he's referring to was in 70 AD or BCE, whichever you like to use. And scholars think that most, if not all, of the Gospels were actually written down after that time. And so this would have been Matthew's community. We've talked a little bit about how the Bible came to be and how these Gospels originally circulated just among certain communities and were kind of written with a certain community in mind before they were all put together in one book. So he points out this reality and says, this radical change caused all kinds of questions to arise. Well, discussion question for you. What might those questions have been? So again, he's talking about they're outside Jerusalem. They don't go to the temple proper. Jewish community finds itself ministering side by side with the very people they've been taught to distrust and hate. it might be a little too strong and a little too anti-Jewish to say that they were taught to hate these people. But if you just look at our reality today of different cultures, different religions, and there's certainly distrust and misunderstanding there. So this radical change caused all kinds of questions to arise. What might those questions have been? What think you?
Well, do I still have to stay away from these people? Are they really unclean? I'm starting to see that they seem like they have the same problems and the same issues as I do right now. I'm seeing more, are they really that different? I guess might be a
Okay.
question.
Okay, yeah.
Well, this would probably have been a generation after the question that was raised of Paul. Is it appropriate for Gentiles to become Christians? And the James and Peter and the others came up with an answer to that question. I say that was probably a generation before now, but I'm sure that continued.
Yes, that was one of the big theological questions that we get a taste of, especially in the book of Acts. But yes, thank you.
Where do we worship? The temple is gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially where do we worship on the high holy days, right?
Right,
Like
right.
they would have been used to worshiping in synagogues, but you go to, it's kind of like no Christmas Eve service. So I don't know. So trying to find a modern day correlate, but yeah, something like that.
What is worship supposed to look like?
What is
And
worship
be-
supposed to look like? Yeah. Good.
And
Yes.
One of the-
if they're worshiping in my house, do I really want these people in my house?
Right. Yeah.
Well,
House
the
churches.
the Jesus followers were first called Christians in Antioch, and in Antioch, apparently, the pagans had a big parade every evening out to the pagan playgrounds, and the Christians started having a counter parade to a Christian service somewhere, and they were mockingly called, "Oh, those are just the Christ followers, the Christians."
Yeah. Look at the little Christs prancing around. Yeah, it was first a derogatory term. That is correct. As a striking number of things are, that things that start out as insults or derogatory terms are sometimes kind of grasped onto later by the people who were called that thing. Okay, so one of the best known passages in Matthew, perhaps. Nadine already read most of it for us. I had a snippet, so we're not going to actually pull it out and read it all again because she read the main part and we got the gist. But just in case, that the summary is Jesus kind of tells this parable where there's sheep separated from the goats right and left, and you turn to the sheep on the right and say, "Come, inherit the kingdom, because I was hungry and you gave me drink." Separated from the goats, right? Sorry about that. Had to mute somebody for an echo. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. Whatever you did for the least of these, you did unto me. And then same thing on the left with, you did not do this. So, and it lines it out here. There are 6 things: hungry, thirsty, stranger, naked, sick, and in prison. So talk to me about, what your usual reaction to that passage is, especially if you were hearing it for the first time, if you can pretend that. What in the passage upsets you versus what gives you comfort?
Depends if you're the one who is hungry, thirsty, stranger, naked, sick, and in prison, or the you.
Yeah, which side are you on?
Which way
Okay.
are we looking at it?
Well,
I think what I looked at, or in the past when I've read this through, I say to myself, oh, I can feed the hungry. Oh, I can give them something to drink. Oh, I can welcome a stranger, and I can give away my clothing, and maybe I can go visit some sick people, or maybe I can take care of them if they're in my family. But the one that I really get stuck on is when would I ever go to the prison to visit someone? Although we did do it once, but that one in younger years anyway, I always thought that's like, I just can't imagine how I could do that. Just going to visit someone I didn't, maybe if I didn't know anybody there, just happened to go in and say, can I visit somebody?
yeah, they usually don't let you do that these days.
Our women's group used to have a Christmas party for the inmates up at Ferris School, which was a prison for teenagers. And I remember everybody that ever went in there, the door clanging shut behind you kind of made the biggest impression of the activity. When that big old steel door clanged shut, that gave a message.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hi.
It's Katie.
Hi there.
Okay.
How you doing?
All right.
I just have to expound on the prison thing because of, as you know, my son was incarcerated and I thought I would never, ever, ever go into a prison. I was petrified when I had to, and especially when I had to go into maximums. And it's so different from jail. And you'll be surprised what you'll do for your, if it's a loved one, you will do it,
Yeah.
But then you'll see just how many other people have to do the same thing. And it's actually was a blessing in a way because I realized just how they needed us, There were a lot that didn't have people that came to visit them. And my son used to tell me about it. And he said he used to hear them moan and cry at night. They put on a good persona of strength during the day or whatever, but in the evening, a lot of them were young. Some of them were young and they were crying out for their parents. And, it was something. So to make a long story short, to see other ministers and pastors that did go in, it was a gift. It was a good thing to see, but it's not easy.
That's poignant. Thank you for sharing that, Katie. And as you were talking, it made me think a little bit of now, obviously, the experience of having a loved one incarcerated is going to be totally different. But as a pastor, I once visited someone in prison on Christmas Eve, and I remember being just kind of weighed down by just the general spirit in there, or the lack thereof, right? Like everyone was cold. Everyone was, and I'm talking mostly about the staff and the guards, right? And I'm not criticizing them because I have no idea what it's like to deal with what they do day in and day out. However, just the feeling of walking in and everything feels so cold and so lifeless. And I remember there was one gentleman who came in, he wanted to see his girlfriend for Christmas. I forget because of something he had with him or something had gone wrong, he couldn't go in. And there was this loud verbal argument between him and the guard. And I was, after doing that, I was getting ready to go to candlelight service. And I remember being struck by the contrast and thinking to myself, it's no joke that there are there are dark places in the world that really need God's people to bring something there.
Totally agree with that.
But thank you for sharing.
I can remember what a challenge it was to get Bibles into the prison. And we actually wound up working a way to, I hate to say this, but smuggle the Bibles in. We left them, we were told to leave them in this particular place. And there was a very cooperative corrections officer who knew to go to that place to pick up these Bibles and how to distribute.
Yeah, that's always an interesting exercise too.
And Tom, there are Bibles in there because my son, he never really read the Bible too much, but he said that was one book that he picked up when he was in there. So
Yeah.
thank God for that, for the smuggling.
Yeah, might save somebody's life, huh?
Yep.
All right, thank you all for sharing. So I think I want to do a quick, because here on Zoom, we don't have the discussion tables of Wednesday night. I think I want to do 2 breakout rooms real quick to just talk about this passage in more practical terms a little bit. So a few of you, if you have paper or something handy or something you can screenshot with, you might want to. But I want you to just talk about the Matthew 25 issues, discuss with each other, and you don't have to have the exact questions. This is not, let me just give you a sense of the discussion here. But discuss with each other how you think your faith community is addressing the issues, how Calvary or our larger faith community of Newark, because we do things together. Some of them might be obvious, but see if you can go beyond the obvious. Of the issues identified, which of these speaks to your heart? Do you find a common interest in your group? And remember, what we're talking about is the 6 here, the 6 Matthew 25 issues. So you might just be able to commit these to memory for your breakout room, but hunger, thirst, stranger, perhaps foreigner, or however you want to interpret that. Naked, literal or metaphorical, sick, in prison. Hungry, thirsty, a stranger, naked, sick, and in prison. And just talk about these things where, in practical terms, in our community, where these needs are, how they're being addressed, how they're being missed, the role the faith community plays. Is that clear enough? Hope so. It's also broad and just let you kind of take the discussion, but go practical, talk about where it is, what it is, how faith communities are responding, where there are gaps, and just where your heart is and why. And I'd like to give you about 10 or 15 minutes to talk about that in breakout rooms, and they will be assigned randomly. Oh, and by the way, with the recording and the live streaming, your discussion in the breakout rooms is not live streamed or recorded. Okay, so when you're in the breakout room, you can turn your video on and you can share more confidential things, and you don't have to worry about the live stream. Okay, we'll be dividing you up now and take 10 to 15 minutes to talk about those things. So for anyone watching this, who might be watching this recording later, we've been in breakout rooms for about 10 or 15 minutes. So now share what, and we had some of you had to stop mid-sentence. So perhaps you'd like to finish what you were saying, or no. What I'd like you to share is, insights from your from your group? What's something that struck you? Where does your discussion go?
I think part of our discussion went to what further, like, we started out with the visiting, someone in prison, but it's also more important what maybe just as more important to what do we do when that prisoner gets out? Do we help and support? In what ways can we help and support the prisoner when he's coming back into society, and how many issues that he, that they can come up against from various, whatever their, issue was. What else did we talk about? I think the community, what identifying, it's not just our church community, but it's the neighborhood community, and what are we doing? We didn't really answer the question nationally or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is some of our offerings and the things that we do. I'm thankful that we are a part of it, just not an independent Baptist church, but a part that we can feel that even if we can't be everywhere in this nation for some of the problems, that we can still help those hungry and homeless in other places by our contributions, in the different offerings that we have at our church. So we have a worldwide connection with helping, feed and give drink to, and clothing and housing or whatever, all those things we can support in a more, a larger community. And then we have to work on those missions, or each one of those areas can be a mission for us to do again within the church, within our own community.
Yeah, and I heard in that. I heard a little bit more of that when I popped into your group about the our church can only do so much, right? And part of what you're saying there is why I put so much emphasis on denominational connections, because we can do a whole lot more together than we can separately.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What else? I really do want to hear Marcia's profound point, or whatever whatever might have been cut off.
Well, I don't know that it was that profound, so I'm just going to step back for a minute, and I'm sharing something that Alan said, but I think it ties into the opposite comment from Kathy of, how are we supporting prisoners when they get out? So not only with prison ministries, but perhaps there are other ways. Alan has suggested that we take a different approach and maybe look at symptoms, and can we be proactive in our ministry so that perhaps we can prevent, some challenges and problems that individuals have in their lives, and that maybe we need to do more deep diving as it relates to those types of situations, so that we can help prevent issues versus just being on the back end of dealing with problems once they arise. With respect to my comment, we were just talking about, helping and the way that the scriptures are written to tell us that when someone is hungry, you fed me and you did these things. And we also had a great example of something that, again, Alan had shared. And my only comment was, I think sometimes if we thought more about the fact that every person that we see is a child of Jesus, and we welcome them and interact with them that way, that maybe it's easier for us then to feed them or to clothe them or to help them when they're sick. And I think that the way the scripture is written, it's challenging us to think that way, because the I is Jesus. You're doing all of these things for me whenever you help someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. And it's a reminder that Jesus, when he, it's kind of very simple prose that he uses, right? He talks about the immediate needs of the hungry and the thirsty and the imprisoned and all of that. But it leaves for our work a lot of these greater questions about, well, what about when they get out of prison, and what about keeping them from going in prison and things like that. Do any of you remember one of the primary indicators, or one of the strongest correlations that there is earlier in someone's life regarding whether they end up in prison later?
I think it had to
Can
do
you
with
read?
education. It was education.
Yes.
The studies were of third grade students, how well they did on their reading tests.
That's it.
Right.
They predicted that from those scores, the low scoring made the number of beds in a prison for the future, if 10 years later or whatever it would be from that point. Very sad
Yeah.
to think of it that way.
Yeah, and I bring that up because if you you think about all the things we do as a church, teaching values and teaching morals and supportive community, introducing people to the love of God and all of that, it clearly makes a big difference. At least I hope it does. But you also take facts like that and factors like that, and it's interesting to me to think, if you think about what Alan and others and Marcia was summing up later, that that preventative, that justice piece, that preventing the problems in the first place or going to the root of the problems. It's interesting to think if a church has a church does something like reading supports, or how many churches have tutoring and things like that. And who knows, you never know what kind of dent you're making in that kind of thing, where we find it's just uncanny how correlated being able to read at the third grade level by third grade and that later trouble with the law is. Is it too far-fetched to take these words of Jesus in other places and say, I was struggling reading and you read to me, and in so doing you kept me out of the prison that you might have visited me in. I know that's a little bit hyperbolic, but also, is it too far-fetched to think that way when we have the data? I think it's interesting and good to think that way.
And the education thing is there's some thoughts about why. One is to, as a scientist, to get a correlation or statistical, but the hardest question is always to understand why. And one of the dynamics that I've read about that's clear is when you go into 4th and 5th grade and you are now, there's this natural separation process that happens. And there's the identification of the not so smart kid and the smart kid. And then once we label somebody, it's hard for them not to become what you call them. So once you start telling a kid that you're not a good athlete, they quit trying to be an athlete. Once you tell them that you're not a good reader, it's harder to, some people will become stubborn and determined and will fight to read, but many people will be, particularly at a young age, a 3rd or 4th, 5th grader, without tremendous maturity, they quickly get clicked. And I know what all my teacher friends, and Kathy, you can tell me, they say by the 6th grade, the biggest thing is the clique you're in school. That becomes a dominant thing. And you're either in, and you always see it in these movies, there's the cheerleader clique and the athlete clique and the nerd clique and all that. And they always play that out. But the reality is that happens. You get into cliques, and if you get into the clique of the kid who can't pass the class, it's hard to get out.
That's why Kathy taught kindergarten, right?
That's right.
Well, that is, but I think it's the self-accepting of a label and then having the label become a fact for you, and without I had at that age, I know personally, I had speech problems. I still have them to this day, where it's hard for me to pronounce certain words. And I was in speech class and I got ridiculed for it. And if it wasn't for the strength of my parents to continue to support me, I don't know I would have gotten through that, because I was separated from the kids who could speak well. I was separated, and it was almost a mark of lack of intelligence for me. And so I know personally that separation because I felt it at that age. So when I speak about it, I'm not making it up. I was in the group that was, you got pulled out of class and you got taken into another room, and the other kids wanted to know where you went. As soon as they found out you went because you weren't able to do the regular classwork without getting that special, it quickly became a label for you. And without a real good support system, it can destroy you. And if you get single family homes or homes where, there's a struggle. When I was a kid, almost all the moms weren't working. It was a different society from today. So there was, as soon as I got home from school, there was my mother to talk to, whereas latchkey's kids don't have that. It's a different situation. And there's no question in my mind the support is necessary to get you through. And somebody wrapped that up earlier and just said, you need to be loved. You need to feel loved. And I think that's true. So I think that's real once you start. And I think the thing is, up till then, being able to read is not a big differentiator, but around 3rd or 4th grade, it becomes a differentiator.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for that. And any other discussions from earlier, thoughts on these, how these issues work out in practice?
I was just thinking about James and his work to get education into prisons.
Oh, James
And-
Elliott. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I admire what he has been able to do.
Yes, he was able to
What he's
get things,
doing.
what he did do while he was in prison, I think, was worthy of him. It was hard work to try to be able to help people in prison, and continuing to, when he's gotten out, to get the education he needs to be able to really continue to help prisoners.
And
Do you think
he's also politically active to make it possible for other prisoners to get an education.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which you have to be, right? Because if we've talked about that in some of the justice Bible studies I've done, talking about justice ministries. How can you affect change in some of these places without engaging the people that make the decisions, and it's very meaningful for someone to be visited in prison, and there's got to be a reason that Jesus called that out. But also when it comes to a more just system that doesn't give up on these people, because Tom, I heard your comment when I was in your room about how some of these folks are just given up on, not treated as human anymore, et cetera. How do you reform that without the engagement? Yeah.
If I may, just quickly just throw something in there also.
Please.
Again, with my son's incarceration, he also learned a lot through the youth that were incarcerated in there. So now at this point in time, I have to thank God he earned some certificates while he was incarcerated, and it helped him to be able to go and educate or counsel the youth. So now he has, with those certificates that he came out of prison with, he has acquired a job through prayer, and it's a job working with at-risk youth.
Amen.
And that's where he wanted. That's where he feels like he could make a start, because believe it or not, a lot of young people are in prison. And so I'm very grateful to God for that, because that's something that he wanted to do when he got home. He said, Mom, I really want to work with the youth, especially the at-risk, the hard one, the ones that people don't really want to deal with, because it's challenging. very, very challenging. So,
Mm.
Earlier, I think we were talking about being in prison and how, you go into the prison and the doors close and you just kind of see what it's like there. And I think, Pastor, you mentioned being there at Christmas time one time. And at the time, I thought to myself, I may have shared this before. I used to volunteer with a program at Gander Hill Prison. It was called the Key Program, and that program was designed for inmates who had they were convicted of drug for some drug charge. Generally, they were addicted to some drug, but while they were in prison, they had made efforts to get clean, and they had pretty much had lived kind of a modeled life while they serving their time in a model way. So they were able to be separated. And what you talked about as the kind of the feeling of desperation, or Christmas didn't seem like Christmas. And I remember, Thanksgiving and Christmas, we would have parties actually for the young men who were in the Key Program. And they were given privileges, and they were treated more like they were incarcerated, but they were given that opportunity to visit family. And I would go up and teach programs, like just basic stuff, like how to reconcile a checkbook, or, how to balance your making sure you have your money and understanding what's happening with your money. They were given an opportunity to feel human. And I think it made all the difference in the world in, first of all, how they served their time, and then what they did after they served their time. A lot of those young men were able to come out of prison and do well. So it is in our best interest if we can find ways, and the prison system, the systems can find ways, first of all, to let people do their time, but help them feel human while they're doing their time. Give them the opportunity to have their dignity, right?
Right.
And then the other part is then have the outside, the things that I did with the Key Program and other people came in and did with the Key Program, prepared these young men for success after they served their time. And that's important as well.
Right. Yeah.
think
Thank you,
the whole-
Cynthia.
The whole thing to me about, since we have focused more on that prison aspect, is that I think that our church as a whole, we've all said the number of people we know in various situations that have gone to prison, but there have been people supporting them while they're in prison. I won't name off names, but I know of a half dozen people that wrote letters to people when they were in prison, even though they couldn't go visit them, and maybe didn't even know them that well, but still started a conversation with them and got letters back from them. And again, since it's not my story to tell, I'm not going to say the names of people, but I've heard that from many people. And also that when some of the people have gotten out that were, that are, again, children of us or spouses of us, that are so thankful for that connection still, that somebody cared enough to talk to them in whatever fashion that they could. And, that they felt good at being able to be accepted back into the church, even after they'd been in prison, that they could still walk into the church and not feel like that I'd be shunned or something, So
that there's community there.
And I think even the simple thing that we used to do, the angel tree, or the what we did with the women that were imprisoned at the house, or the other connection. What's
New expectations.
It was new expectations. That even supporting them, and giving them a reason, even though they couldn't give, to be able to give to their children or their families. Both of those ministries were like that. And we, that those things are important too, to maybe be the turnaround to someone who says, look, they care enough about me. Not that they're giving something to me, but that I can give a gift to my children who, while I'm in prison, that those little things are very meaningful. They might seem like small things for us to do, but they're helpful.
My brother spent 7 years drug related. And he was crying out for help before that, before they got to him. But when we went to visit him, and I had to take my baby there, and I had to strip my baby to go see him, I said I was never going back to the prison again. Never. I don't care if he stayed there forever. I was not going to subject my family to that. But we still communicated through the mail. And I stopped writing him too, because his letters were still condemning everybody around him and not accepting any responsibility for where he was. And then his letters changed and he started accepting some responsibility. And then I was able to talk to him. We were able to talk and we was able to say, okay, what are you going to do with this time that you're here? And then he started taking classes. And he started doing this, started doing that to prepare himself to, because he was going to get out. That's a fact. He's going to get out. But once he got out, guess what? Somebody had to take a chance on him. Somebody who was in employment had to take a chance when he went to apply for a job. And where he's at now, it's been like 12 years. He's been there the whole 12 years. A woman in that place took a chance on him. And we talked about probably 6 months ago, and we talked about that. And I said, and now that individual can take a chance on another prisoner. But had you not performed like you have, there would be no more chances for anybody coming out of jail at this particular employer, who's a big employer in this town, thousands of people. So I think what I'm trying to say is that there's multiple levels on this when it comes to it. And I think it starts with family, accept them. Our church has done, I think, a good job at accepting incarcerated people back into our lives. And can we do better? Probably. But at the same time, those people that we've accepted back in are the ones who determine, I think, on how much better as a congregation we can be and will be by how well they are doing and how well they do and how well they pave the way for others, because there will be others that are going to need the services that we're offering now. And if we don't believe that, then something's wrong, because there will be others. And I think all this stuff that we studied today is telling us that these types of people, all these needs are out there, and they will continue to be out there. What are you going to do about it when you're faced with it? And we've got to do something.
Yeah, thank you all. I have to call time on us, but thank you, Richard, for sharing that. That was powerful. And my hope was to take this Matthew 25 stuff and talk about practical things, and that's exactly what we've done. So thank you for that.